In the last video, I touched very briefly on the educational influence of Coming Out Simulator. This time, I want to talk briefly about the simulator using the EDGE framework for educational game design. This framework is just a basic outline of what makes a successful game. It has three basic parts: the MDA, instructional design principles, and the educational objectives. The MDA is a framework all unto itself used for typical game design. This framework is again comprised of three parts. In the case of Coming Out Simulator, the mechanics of the game is the system of clicking through the text arranged like text messages and choosing different dialogue choices to progress through the game. The aesthetics, on the other hand, are what the user encounters during gameplay. The narrative of the simulator, the sensation of the game, the gray and sepia palette, and the unusual aspect ratio that mimics an iPhone. I would also argue that there is a sense of fellowship and self-expression in the game, since the user is meant to connect to the characters through their stripped look. According to Scott McCloud in Understanding Comics, characters who have a minimalistic look rather than a realistic one have a higher likelihood of having the audience transfer themselves into the character. Finally, the aesthetics include a sense of discovery that is fueled by the choices presented to the user in order to progress through the game. In the middle of the MDA framework, we have the dynamics, which describes the runtime experience of the player. In this case, the outcome of the player's choices and the user interface behavior goes underneath the dynamics. It is plain to see the interaction here. The aesthetics are fueled heavily by the mechanics that shape a text messaging-like environment. Vice versa, the text messaging-like environment helps the aesthetic communicate a more mature narrative to the audience. The next branch of the EDGE framework states that there must be educational objectives in mind with the game. In my last video, we dug deeper and recognized that the learning objective is a lesson about honesty and the tenuous relationship between living an honest life versus a happy one. This can be applied to a variety of things, from struggling to come out or struggling to admit to having a drug addiction. The next component is that the game must include instructional design principles. By looking at the simulator through Jim G's 36 principles of game-based learning, we can see that the game does include many of these principles. Principle number 14 states that the audience should get ample opportunity to operate the game and to explore different choices. I believe that is what Coming Out Simulator accomplishes, since the whole mechanic of the game is based on a branching narrative. Also, G's principle number 27 states that the audience should be given explicit information about their choices on demand and just in time. Many of the responses one gives to different characters in the game have immediate consequences. On the other hand, the game also does well in dropping hints to the player to avoid a bad reaction. Most notably, during the climax, it becomes increasingly obvious that the father character will become violent through the narration of the mother character. I also believe that there are certain lifelong learning principles involved with Coming Out Simulator. Most notably, the simulator is meant to generate buzz and get people talking about the consequences of living an honest life. By seeing the comments to the simulator, we can see that the simulator generates a type of storytelling in which people open up about their past experiences dealing with honesty. This is an example of lifelong learning principle number 11, which states that an understanding of an abstract concept improves with multiple and varied examples. Another lifelong learning principle states that the game design must cater to the maturity of the audience. This might be the best thing about the simulator. The narrative is what it is. It doesn't try to preach, change views, or cater to a specific audience. Ncase creates it with an acceptance that only those who are interested will bother playing it, and therefore the audience, based on their maturity, attentiveness, and understanding, can take from it what they will. Coming Out Simulator has many positive educational aspects, but it can still be improved. Ncase created the game in a game jam, so it is understandable that I may sound picky for expressing these changes. In any case, here are two proposals I have to better communicate the ideas Ncase expresses through the game. The first change is to introduce a reward system for the player. Most of the game has negative outcomes for choosing to be honest, and also for being dishonest. This seems counterintuitive to me. You do not know exactly what you said that began a certain narrative. It may be hard to add positive reinforcement to this game, since it illustrates a no-win situation. However, it is important to be able to communicate when the user has made small victories. A small victory noise may do the trick. It doesn't have to be a happy tune. Perhaps a shock gasp when a character comes out to the mother, just some sort of reinforcement to let the user know what they are doing has an effect on the world. This will strengthen the instructional design principles in the game because it points at a much more tangible reward, but does not undermine the tone of the game. Having a shock to gasp and other human sounds may even strengthen the game, since having more sounds can have a more personalized effect that lends itself to the iPhone mechanic of the game. The dynamics will still remain much the same, and more importantly, the educational goals of the game will be supported since the audience now has a deeper understanding of what sort of impact their words, their honesty, can have. The second change I propose for the game is to have the user affect not only the main character's dialogue, but also the dialogue of the other characters. If the educational goals are about honesty, doesn't it only make sense to see the inner battles of more than just one character? Ncase on his website even expressed that after creating the game, he has a better understanding that although his mother was manipulative, she was doing what she felt was best for him. I feel that it's great to see a discussion about honesty outside of the game, but it would be even better to have these multiple narratives be expressed in-game. This can again strengthen some of the instructional design principles that were already present, since the audience will get even more exposure to the problem about honesty through the parents who refuse to acknowledge the truth and through the boyfriend who is too trusting of the truth. This can again incorporate Jim G's design principle number 12. Learners get lots and lots of practice in a context where the practice is not boring. In this case, the audience will be taught through not only one experience but multiple. In the end, by strengthening these design principles, the game will also strengthen its educational goals because the lesson of honesty will be taught through repetition. All in all, Coming Out Simulator does a decent job of standing up to the EDGE framework for game design. Thanks for listening, and if you're at all interested, the link to Coming Out Simulator is provided as well.